So this is an article I disagree with. I read through it, didn't agree with most of the points, and just kind of moved on. But and I thought, if all I ever present here are articles and points of view that I'm 100% in agreement with, it's kind of creating an echo chamber. That's not good for me. It's not good for you. It's not good for anybody. So I thought I will present this one because there's certainly people with the point of view of the author here, and just explain the parts that I disagree with. So the title of the article is "The Morality of Ukraine's War is Very Murky. The Ethical Calculations Are Less Clear Than You Might Think," by Stephen Walt. Now, there was a video I did just last week talking about the U.S. involvement in the war in Ukraine when it comes to supplying weapons, intelligence, humanitarian aid, stuff like that. And my personal take is that morality might play a role in the war, but it's a very small reason. Overall, it is the geopolitical benefits that we stand to gain from, at the very least, a weakened Russia, if not an outright Ukrainian victory in this conflict. Look, the United States is not giving billions of dollars to a country halfway around the world for moral reasons. Okay. Sometimes those things can overlap, and that's fine. And in this case, I think they do. But the author here tends to take the stance that the primary reason for U.S. support, and that's where this is focused, is on a U.S. audience, is due to moral reasons. He says, even before the war began, those who favor giving Ukraine, quote, whatever it takes for as long as it takes, have sought to portray the war in the usual U.S. fashion as a straightforward contest between good and evil. That's not a U.S. thing, and I'm, kind of petty here, but I'm kind of tired of that good versus evil argument when it comes to war and conflict. Like, every country, it's so rare that a country at war views themselves as the bad guy fighting off good, right? How do you think Russia views themselves in this war? They're the good guy fighting off evil. In a future war with China, how do you think they would view the conflict? They're the good guy fighting off evil. Like, it just depends on the audience you're talking to, right? So anyways, I don't know. Maybe it makes people feel good. They say they see the moral stakes as nearly infinite because the outcome of the war will supposedly have a far-reaching impact on the future of democracy, the fate of Taiwan, the preservation of a rules-based order, etc. Not surprisingly, they're quick to condemn anyone who challenges this view as a naive appeaser, a Russian lackey, or someone lacking any sense of moral judgment. I think the author's mixing up the moral argument for war versus the very kind of realist approach of acting in our own self-interest. I don't know how morality plays into the fate of Taiwan. I don't know how morality plays into the future of democracy. It's kind of talking about two different things here. Now, most of this article is kind of riddled through with like qualifiers, right? So the author says things like Russia kicked off this illegal invasion and they're poisoning their critics, or they're falling out of windows and committing war crimes and all that stuff. And then they kind of bring it back to why Ukraine is still not in the moral high ground. But I think he's missing the point entirely here. The fate of Taiwan is not tied to a moral calculation about supporting Ukraine. That's a geopolitical question, right? So I think he's kind of mixing things up a little bit there. They continue by saying Ukraine is a democracy, but also one that still contains some unsavory elements. And this is an argument I've heard quite a bit. I also disagree kind of with his take. There is corruption in Ukraine. There always has been. I don't think that's a secret. Even looking to, I think before this war kicked off, they were the most or one of the most corrupt nations in all of Europe. It's like, it's not a secret. That's not something that's hidden. My argument would be, don't punish the people because of some people in government, right? The people are suffering this Russian occupation of their territories and the bombing of their infrastructure. And if that's something we're concerned about, the legitimacy of democracy in Ukraine, if that's something that we are focused on, then one way to 100% influence that change is if we see this through with Ukraine. Then by the time the war is over, imagine the amount of influence the United States and NATO and the European Union will have to say to Ukraine, you got to clean this up. Now, the leverage when it comes to the rebuilding of the country, that's going to take decades potentially, that would put the United States, NATO, European Union, Western Europe, all these different countries in a position to make that change. I don't like the argument that their democracy is not democracy enough, so we shouldn't support them. I don't think that carries a ton of weight. They continue saying the suggestion that the outcome of this conflict will have a profound impact around the world is even less convincing. I agree in the sense that we can't point to one thing and say, the argument, for instance, that if Russia wins, they're going to move on to Poland next, or Estonia, or Latvia. Like, maybe. I don't know. I've said before, I don't think the Russian military is in a position right now to continue across Ukraine. We just haven't seen that based off what they've done. What are the odds they're going to be able to occupy Ukraine successfully and then move on to a NATO country. I just don't see that in the near term. But the argument isn't necessarily what will happen, it's the unknown of what could happen, right? We know what the global world order roughly looked like over the last 10, 20, 30 years. If Russia were to win this war definitively, it changes that. It introduces uncertainty. So I think that's the argument, not necessarily that something big will happen, but the uncertainty will be introduced. The article continues, the moral case for pursuing peace, even if the prospects are unlikely and the results are not what we'd prefer, lies in recognizing that the war is destroying the country and that the longer it lasts, the more extensive and enduring the damage will be. Unfortunately for Ukraine, anyone who points this out and offers a serious alternative is likely to be loudly and harshly condemned and almost certain to be ignored by the relevant political leaders. A lot of thoughts there. He said anybody who points this out and offers a serious alternative. I haven't seen a lot of those serious alternatives in terms of like detailed plans as to what an end to this war could be. Maybe I've missed them. China put something forward, but it was really vague and pretty much just in line with what Russia would ask. So, hard to look at China's proposal and say that that's a serious alternative. It seemed like they just wanted to have some, get the word out there that they were thinking about it. If you've seen a serious alternative to what a peace plan could look like, let me know. Put it in the comments below. Worth looking at for sure. And I've always said that peace needs to be a consideration. No matter how intense the fighting is raging, we always have to have someone pushing in some level of government for how can we get to an end to this conflict, right? Personal take. But here they say the challenge is recognizing that the war is destroying the country and the longer it lasts, it's more extensive and enduring the damage will be. That's Ukraine's country. Right there, what this reminds me of is the saying, I've heard it when it comes to personal trainers and things. They say, I can't care more about your fitness or your health than you do. We're never going to get there. This feels like us saying to Ukraine, we care more about your country than you do. If the genuine concern, is the destruction of the country and the extensive and enduring damage that Ukraine is going to suffer, why are we the ones determining that? We're not the ones that are going to have to live there or are living there. That seems very much like a Ukrainian decision. If they're willing to put up with the destruction that this war is causing just to keep fighting in the hopes of victory, who are we to say, no, your country's too destroyed? You've crossed that line. Too much destruction. We can't support this anymore kind of thing. Just think about that for a minute, stepping back. Somebody stepping into your country and saying your country is too destroyed for you to continue fighting. You have to find a way for peace. I just don't think that is the number one reason that the United States, NATO, or the West would push for some sort of negotiated settlement. I think there are a lot of other reasons, but the idea that it's the destruction inside of Ukraine, I don't think that's top 5 even, I guess I can't just say that and leave out what I think could be reasons that the U.S. would want to push Ukraine into a settlement. First, I think, is any fear of escalation. That's been a concern since day one. You can't completely write that off, but the idea that something in this war could lead to a wider Russian attack somewhere and pull in NATO or other countries, that might be a reason the U.S. would want to help wrap this thing up sooner than later, even if it ends up being on Russia's terms, potentially. The other one is that if continued aid for Ukraine and what is needed over the long haul is so much that it degrades NATO's ability to effectively deter Russia, there could be a line in the sand where the U.S. or NATO is pushing for a settlement to kind of wrap this thing up before we actually get to that point. I don't know that either one of those are on the table or even being discussed. Just, if a peace plan was being pushed by the United States, I think those are probably more likely reasons than, that there's too much destruction in Ukraine. And then the last piece here, I just completely disagree with. So he says, if a friend wants to do something you think is ill-advised or dangerous, you are under no moral obligation to aid their efforts, no matter how strongly committed they may be. On the contrary, you'd be morally culpable if you helped them act as they wished and the result was disastrous. So this is the whole idea that people are saying Ukraine wants to keep fighting, so we should give them the means to do so. And the reason I disagree with this so much is that we have no idea how this war is going to end. Right? As an example, if you go back to the last month of World War II and looked at Nazi Germany, and Hitler's in his bunker, and there's millions of Allied troops surrounding Berlin, and the Red Army has pushed into the capital city, Germany had lost that war. They just hadn't signed the paperwork yet, right? Like, their Air Force was destroyed. The only thing defending the approaches to the city and fighting block to block were young boys and old men. That army was done. right? At that point, going to the German army at that point and saying, what do you need to keep on fighting, would be morally bankrupt, because it was just a matter of time until they were entirely defeated, if not entirely killed, right? That is so far from what is going on right now in Ukraine. I mean, you'll have people who have strong opinions about where this thing is headed, but if we're being honest, nobody knows how this war is going to end. So, as an example, let's say that there is a 50% chance, making up a number here, 50% chance that Ukraine can win this war so long as aid continues for another, say, 36 months, but 0% chance if aid stops. What's the morally right decision in that scenario? It seems like, and I feel like there's a long debate to be had here, but if it's that 50% chance, it seems like the morally right thing to do is to continue that aid, giving them a chance, right? If they truly are an ally, truly are a friend. Now, there's a line somewhere in there that you don't want to cross, and it does become, morally the wrong thing to do. Again, if that is down to 0% chance that Ukraine can succeed, which again, we're not anywhere near that right now, but if that number was 0 and you knew it, that would be the wrong thing to do, to give them more weapons and kind of push them back into the arena and say, you just keep going, we got your back. So where is that line? Is it under 50%? Is it above 50%? Is it 25%? Where does that sit to where it becomes the wrong thing to, press Ukraine to continue fighting? I think the reason I'm so much against this last portion here is just kind of the suggestion that the war has already been decided. Ukraine lost. It's over. There's nothing more you can do. So any additional aid is just costing Ukrainian lives for no gain. Maybe that's an assessment in the Pentagon or CIA somewhere that none of us have seen, but in terms of publicly available information, that's just not matching reality on the ground. I'm not going to say Ukraine has an 80% chance of winning or anything like that, but it is far from decided. So to try to make a moral judgment right now, saying that morally sending more aid could just kill more people for no good cost, I don't think that's accurately reflecting the current state of this conflict. So overall, I disagree with a lot of portions of this article, but I generally understand where the gentleman was going. And, I think there are a lot of people that hold these points of view. So thought it was worth bringing up, presenting those, and then, trying to talk through a little bit why I disagree. But that's all I got for now. I will link this article as well as the national security sit reps I put out on Substack in the description below. That is 7 to 10 of the top national security stories this week, along with podcast recommendations. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.